Well, hello, Bill.
Hi, Linda. How are you?
I'm fine. It's good to see you. I thought we might tell our loyal listeners what we're going to talk about today.
Well, we have a wonderful discussion of the meltdown of one of our members of the cabinet and an exploration of what's going on there. There is some mixed news on the economy that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I wish you'd explain it to me because I'm finding
it's a little complex.
Yeah.
Then we're going to talk a little bit about the Super Bowl halftime and our responses to that. So, with no further introduction, here is Linda.
Well, I want to start off with a correction. I said on the previous podcast that the good people of Milwaukee and Michigan had shown great discipline in not meeting violence with violence. But I had originally said Minneapolis and Minnesota, and then someone corrected me and said, no, it's Milwaukee and Michigan.
And that's why we've kicked that person off the show. We no longer have our fact checker. No, mea culpa. That was me. I heard the wrong thing. This aging thing is not going as well as I'd like.
It's not for cowards, that's for sure. So, but my point is, I believe someone who incorrectly corrected me. Well, we all do this from time to time. So why did I do that? One is that I have nominal aphasia, and I've had it since I was very young, and that means I forget especially proper names, and it's getting worse. So I didn't trust myself, but I trusted the other person. That would be you.
Who also has nominal aphasia. And I really do think highly of the good people of Michigan, so being from there.
Okay, so here we are with that little example. But I wanted to explore in this section I'm calling the Ladies Who Fawn on Trump, what happens when this kind of response becomes inherent to someone's personality. That is where you subsume what you think is right and what you know is right for what somebody that you trust says. So, Bill, it's unethical for a psychologist or a psychiatrist to diagnose from a distance anybody without a face-to-face diagnostic meeting. But
that's reasonable.
But I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but I play one on this podcast. I feel free to offer my views on what I call the Ladies Who Fawn on Trump, and they are Susie Wiles, his chief of staff, Pam Bondi, head of the DOJ, and to a lesser extent, but for no less toxic reasons, Barry Weiss, the new director of CBS News. Now, I've already said a few words about Susie Wiles, and I'll revisit that now, but I will return to Barry Weiss next podcast. So today, I'm going to focus on Pam Bondi and her self-immolation at the House Oversight Committee hearings on February 11th, which I assume you saw clips of too.
Yeah, it was an abomination.
Absolutely right. Now, to do this, I first have to update our loyal listeners on the fight-or-flight response, which I know we've all heard of. Now, a set of characteristics in relation to fear. Fight, flight, freeze, which would be the deer in the headlights response, or appeasement, which is also called fawning. This has to do with a response that becomes chronic or ultimately a response that's inseparable from one's personality. So in stressful situations, one response is to seek affirmation of one's self-worth through proximity with someone one trusts to provide them with affirmation and a sense of security. The fawning response is how a person who is needy of affirmation tries to secure the relationship with someone to whom he or she is emotionally attached. So that's the very complex explanation of why I accepted your totally incorrect correction.
That explains a whole lot about my life, actually.
Could you spare me? Okay. Susie, let's start with Susie Wiles. In an earlier podcast, I discussed the two-part article on Susie Wiles that appeared in Vanity Fair in December. She's, as everyone knows, Donald Trump's chief of staff. In it, she reveals her worst fears. I'm not an enabler. I'm not a bitch. I guess time will tell whether I have been effective. I guess she means effective at destroying democracy. The use of the word enabler, let's start with that. Her father, Pat Summerall, made a fortune as a famous football player and the voice of the NFL. He was also an absentee father and an alcoholic. Wiles helped her mother stage interventions and got him into treatment. He was sober the last 21 years of his life. Of Trump, Wiles said, some clinical psychologist that knows 1 million times more than I do will dispute what I'm going to say. But high-functioning alcoholics, or alcoholics in general, their personalities are exaggerated when they drink. And so I'm a little bit of an expert on big personalities. She went on to say that Trump has an alcoholic's personality. He operates with a view that there's nothing he can't do. Nothing, zero, nothing. Now, her role as chief of staff ought to be to set up guardrails for Trump, but she doesn't. She is an enabler. She doesn't want to appear unfeminine, that is, a bitch, which is why she uses these two terms. She is his chief enabler who imagines herself as capable of meaningful intervention. Instead, she was taught by her father to consider herself as inconsequential, and Trump provides that sense of self-worth her father denied her. The good news is that she is currently advising Trump to shore up his popularity by talking about what a great economy his policies have brought about. So I say, keep it up. Really good idea. Don't stop now. Now let me turn to Pam Bondi's performance in the House Oversight Committee hearings, investigating how the Department of Justice handled the Epstein files and the failure to control ICE agents, so to the point that they're shooting people in the streets. Her combative, stonewalling, rude, insulting behavior has been criticized by the press, pundits, and elected officials on both sides of the aisles. She acted like a spoiled 13-year-old about to leave the house on a date when her mother tells her she cannot go out dressed like a whore. She demeaned herself and degraded the office of the Department of Justice. Especially egregious was her refusal to turn around and acknowledge their existence, I would say, the survivors in the audience, calling Representative Jayapal's request that she do so sewer politics. So she kept her back to those survivors throughout the hearing. She condemned the administrations of Obama and Biden for failing to release the Epstein files. She neglected to mention that it was during George W. Bush's administration that the Department of Justice drew up the indictment of Epstein that was later quashed under dubious circumstances. She frequently accused the Democratic representatives of not asking the same questions of Merrick Garland when he was head of the Department of Justice, when both Republicans and Democrats on the Oversight Committee criticized him for slow-walking the files they requested. In addition to being rude and stonewalling and, acting like a child, she's also lying. Okay.
Yeah.
The New Yorker profile by Stephanie McCrumman, What Happened to Pam Bondi, How the Attorney General Became a Person Who Loves Telling Trump Yes, which appeared in last week's New Yorker. The article reviews the more egregious actions taken by Pam Bondi, including the revenge harassment of people on Trump's enemy list. This includes former FBI Director James Comey, former CIA Director John Brennan, New York Attorney General Letitia James, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, Senator Schiff, a man who threw a sandwich at a federal agent, which, by the way, turned out to be okay to do. Did you follow that part of the case?
I loved it, and I started making sandwiches.
She also is going after an Office Depot clerk who refused to print flyers for a Charlie Kirk vigil, and reportedly going after Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, and the partner of Renee Nicole Good, who was shot and killed by a federal immigration officer on January 7th. It has meant providing a legal justification for the extrajudicial killing of at least 123 people suspected of smuggling drugs, and for the operation to capture the Venezuelan president. And it has meant becoming the face of the Epstein Files scandal, a position that could ultimately be Bondi's undoing, close quote. The biography presents Bondi as coming from a middle-class Italian family. She received a middling education in Florida and would have preferred to marry and have children rather than practice law. Her father secured her a position in the state's attorney general's office in Tampa, where the state attorney was known to have a preference for blondes. Among other eccentricities, which we don't need to go into, one lawyer described the environment in the attorney general's office as the Blonde Ambition Tour.
Oh, boy.
So you can see the environment that's shaping her.
Yeah.
Unlike most state prosecutors who move on after 5 years or so into private practice, where it's much more lucrative, Bondi stayed for 20 years. So she got a good look at the criminal and felony environment of Florida. According to the article, her evaluations describe her as earnest and hardworking, a prosecutor who sometimes lacked confidence. One of her evaluations from that time is quoted as saying, "While Pam is very capable with good potential, she unnecessarily becomes too intimidated by difficult, long, or important cases." So that's not good. She sometimes becomes intimidated by attorneys as well, close quote. She worked very hard at being liked. She was so typically kind and accommodating that her friends called her Pamby.
Oh, goodness.
She came to the attention of local television affiliates, and as the attention to her grew, she became, and this is a quote from one of her friends, hyper-defensive and hypersensitive to criticism, close quote. One of her friends from that time said, quote, "The overwhelming thing you have to understand about Pam is her debilitating insecurity," close quote. Nonetheless, she agreed to run for Florida State Attorney General on the Republican ticket, despite never having expressed either political views or a passion about anything excepting rescuing dogs. She became more and more conservative in her views as the Republican Party became more and more conservative in Florida. And she would tell her friends that she, quote, had to do it for the party, close quote. Her friends were critical of her views, especially opposing gay marriage and other rights, and her gay friends felt betrayed. Bondi defended herself. "You know me. I love gay people. You know my heart," close quote. Sometimes she would cry. She also often cried over the phone to reporters who did not print flattering stories.
This career trajectory is extremely odd. That she keeps moving in directions that she doesn't seem well fitted for and knows she doesn't seem well fitted for.
That's the arc of the article. That everything she does, she has already said, "I don't want to do that." But then she does it anyway.
Well, that's an interesting moral compass.
Now, I won't rehearse how Bondi was pulled into corruption and dubious practices, because you can find the article online. What I want to notice is a characterization of her as insecure. and then to what seems to me at least to be a significant breakdown in her relationships with trusted others. Her engagement to a wealthy ophthalmologist ended. Her father dies. Her friends gradually drifted away. She spent 13 hours a day in her office. In response to an interview question in her first term, she said, "It's been lonely, very lonely." Her St. Bernard, Luke, was her company, and she brought him and other rescued dogs to work with her. At the same time, she was drawn more and more into Trump's circle at Mar-a-Lago. From the podium of the Republican National Convention in Ohio, she said that she loved Donald, and in response to the chance to lock Hillary up, she said to the audience, "Lock her up. I love that." Her closest friends no longer recognized her. While she did not get appointed to Trump's first administration, she was getting rich beyond her wildest dreams after joining a lobbying firm called Ballard Partners. It was co-led by Susie Wiles, who ran Trump's Florida campaign in 2016, his national campaign in 2024, and is now, as I said, his chief of staff. In this way, she became a complete Trump sycophant, helping to lead the campaign to overturn the 2020 campaign. One of the things I would point out about that is that she really took the lead in claiming that the Pennsylvania election should be overturned, but she didn't sign any document that said so, because she would have been disbarred. So this is what my armchair psychology has concluded. See what you think of this. First of all, Pam Bondi is 60 years old and is desperately holding on to her Barbie doll presentation of self. Now, I say desperate because there is only so long you can hold off the signs of aging. I know, it's hard to take, isn't it?
It sure is, I think.
Her Barbie doll presentation is part of her fawning personality. Her engagement ended on the rocks. Her father, who seems to have told her what to do with her life, died. The marriage and children she wanted have eluded her. Her significant relationship is with her very large dog. She has deep-set feelings of insecurity and inadequacy, needs constant validation of her worth, and seems to have been constructed by the male gaze. To obtain this sense of security and safety, she relies on Donald Trump. To obtain his approval, she is willing to disgrace herself by putting on the metaphoric boxing gloves, degrading the office she holds, and prolong the decades when the victims of Epstein are not heard. She would not even acknowledge their existence. This is what a psychiatrist might call maladaptive response. Her life is one of velation, that is, metaphorically veiling herself. She has hidden herself from herself in order to enact the personality of fawning in the search for self-worth. She has done great harm to the nation, but will feel vindicated as long as Trump gives her the validation she needs.
That's actually a frightening portrayal from a human perspective, because this does not seem like it can end well.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, she does not seem like someone who's going to handle the impending crash of MAGA, which she may, in fact, bring about.
Yes, that's right. And she's also probably not going to handle well the inevitable efforts to have her disbarred.
If not prosecuted. What an irony.
Yeah, and there won't be anybody there to help her because Trump just throws people under the bus. He doesn't really care about people at all.
Yeah, she could easily be charged with failing to comply with the subpoena. Actually, breaking the law.
Breaking law, yeah.
Yeah, Congress passed that law. So.
Her performance for an audience of one was very telling because the commentators and the pundits have all said it was horrible. But Donald Trump said he liked it because she was defending him. Well, how was she defending him? The questions were not about him. They were about her running of the DOJ.
I'm having a bizarre reaction to this. It's like when I watched the Boris Karloff version of Frankenstein.
An excellent film.
The monster is actually, in some sense, not acting because of its own inclinations, but because of the situation in which it's been forced to be. I don't want to feel sorry for Pam Bondi. She acted like a monster and deserves all that's coming. But this is beyond sad. And it kind of shows how Trump prey on people with weak personalities and weak senses of self that need his affirmation as someone important to feel important themselves.
I think that's right. The other thing I think relates to this notion of self-worth is finding yourself suddenly very wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
she doesn't come from a wealthy background, and suddenly she's working for this lobbying firm where they're acting on behalf of Qatar, they're acting on behalf of Elon Musk. She's getting enormously wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
And, nothing perks up your sense of self-worth like that.
Oh, yeah. J. Paul Getty once said, "I've been rich and I've been poor. I prefer rich."
Exactly.
I think that was J. Paul Getty.
Oh, well, we'll soon find out.
Loyal listener, could you kind of Google that while we're talking here?
I have the same double-mindedness about this that you do. On the one hand, this deeper psychological malfunctioning is something that would normally arouse sympathy. On the other hand, everybody gets to make choices. And she has made a set of choices that wound her up in front of that committee, trying to punch above her weight and not doing it.
Yeah, seriously punching above her weight. We won't say anything about the Florida educational system.
I admit to this kind of ambivalence, but I felt it very strongly when I was watching her.
Yeah, very much so.
I really did. Barbie goes to Congress, and she wound up participating in the disintegration of democracy and in leaving those survivors sitting there. It was just an abomination. Well, I think we've left you all with much to ponder, at least I hope so, because now Bill is going to explain the many contradictory reports about the economy. Last week you told us we're heading for a cliff.
Yeah. The interesting thing and the confusing thing about this is the January job report was unexpectedly high, estimating around 130,000 new jobs. What's confusing about this is the revised numbers for 2025 showed that there was a decrease in overall employment in 2025, which tells you that what they are looking at when they take these surveys is they are taking at the 90% confidence interval and then taking the mean of that as what they expect the figure to be. The actual figure after revision could be anywhere from 7,000 to 150,000. So that's normal, and that's why we revise these things. But this is on the high side and kind of unexpected. Peter Navarro and Stephen Smith admitted that deporting immigrants wasn't about freeing up jobs for U.S. citizens, which is the reason this whole immigration hysteria was started. The argument was immigrants were taking jobs that U.S. citizens could have gotten and were blocking them out of it, and if you displaced the immigrants, then U.S. citizens would get those jobs. They admitted that it is deportation and the decreased employment of immigrants that are depressing job numbers.
Yeah.
They said this out loud. So this is really about making the U.S. white. The reality of fewer foreign workers means less spending on goods and services, which means lower employment overall. Additionally, U.S. citizens are not rushing to do the jobs immigrants do in agriculture and health service, nor are they or can they replace immigrants in very highly skilled jobs. So the mask is off. The immigration thing is just about getting rid of brown people, and it has no expectation of actually doing anything for the jobs that Donald Trump promised to the voters who voted for him.
It is obvious to me that it's about white nationalism, which is putrid. There was a report today out of the agricultural sector, and again, Minnesota, because the agricultural sector has really suffered from this surge of thugs coming in to the agricultural communities, not only those who follow the crops or who work in the dairy industry, but also those who work at processing the foods we eat. And it's been very, very difficult for that sector of the economy. They're really suffering from it. It's not creating jobs, as you say.
Yeah, the jobs thing is complicated. It's very unsatisfying for people because they don't understand the technicalities.
Yes.
An economist, Paul Krugman, on his Substack, does some really nice empirical analysis that he explains quite well that we don't have the capacity to repeat. His recent article called Making Americans Stagnant Again, subtitled Deportations Don't Create Jobs and Will Increase Deaths of Native-Born Americans. Who knew? Because, of course, so many are in health care.
Oh, that's true. Yes.
Which is an insightful observation.
Yeah.
Getting back to the economy, there's been a lot of weird things. There was a crash in the AI bubble this week. AI stocks tanked. They're going back up. Now, of course, brokers are saying this is temporary and that it's a great time to buy. Don't. The reality is no one knows what's going on. And moreover, the success of these firms, of this AI growth, depends entirely on massive public subsidies to cover their electricity costs,
Yes.
which are not necessarily forthcoming. So if states don't decide to subsidize these plants, push all of that cost onto the consumer, this bubble will burst. In a slightly related area connected to the computer industry as well, equity capital firms that have heavily invested in software companies are in trouble.
Oh.
Right. So there's a part of this industry that's going down. These equity firms are investment firms. They're private investment firms, and they buy stakes in the companies developing the software.
Gotcha.
So they're big investors there, but they don't like to be tied up for a long period of time, right? They want a software hit, and people aren't looking at that right now. So since the shine's gone off that industry, a lot of these equity firms have a lot of investment in it that they're afraid is going to go south. Now, Donald Trump keeps telling us the stock market is going up, and of course it does. By the way, the stock market outside the United States is going up faster than the stock market in the United States, and it's not any investment, okay? It's trading of these equities back and forth, speculating, driving the price up, and speculation builds nothing.
Yes.
And it creates no jobs. So we need to be concerned about what's going on here. And on the job side of this, because AI is likely to eliminate huge numbers of paper pushers in every field that produces routine documents, like finance and law and other administrative drones, these people work in office buildings.
Yes.
So there's a crisis in the commercial real estate
Yes.
market, which is renting space in office buildings, renting and building office buildings, and financing office buildings. This whole industry is in deep trouble.
Well, this did happen to Portland. Portland went big for tech, and the tech industries moved out when they were taxed to provide social services. And the taxes were aimed at them exclusively. Not sure. I think that's a good idea. It's silly. So they moved to states where that didn't apply, And now they have all this office space and all these homeless people.
And it's very hard to convert offices to residential space.
Well, absolutely. And if you do, you've now converted your downtown area to a encampment for the homeless. I mean, it's not a good, healthy situation. So I agree with you. Emptying out office buildings is terrible, but it's in a way inevitable, and everybody who's so thrilled with AI needs to understand what it really means.
Well, most of the financial transactions that take place in finance can be automated. So 30% of the workforce is in finance. About 5% of them do the finance that's necessary for new business ventures and for cash flow purposes, lending for firms, ongoing working capital. The rest of that is these speculative markets for securities, futures markets on those same securities, all this churning of money for fees that can be done relatively routinely. Many people do this on the computer at home, right? You get this sort of thing. There's going to be a point where you don't need all those people to keep track of these things.
Well, apropos of that, there's a controversy now in Ithaca, New York, about bringing in this kind of company that will suck up a lot of energy, a lot of electricity. And the price of electricity in our area, because we border Canada, has gone very, very high because Trump thought it would be a great idea to, somehow punish Canada by making me pay more for electricity.
Well, of course, a huge amount of the grid here has to do with Niagara Falls and capturing the power of Niagara Falls where they produce electricity, and forgetting that upstate New York was pretty much dependent upon that. In something I was going to talk about later, but I better talk about now in this context, Donald Trump decided to destroy the world yesterday. His administration rescinded the finding under the Clear Air Act that allowed the EPA to regulate emissions of greenhouse gases.
I know.
The EPA can no longer regulate these. That means no standards for cars. That means we can't, except on a state level, ban somebody from taking an old coal plant and firing it up to produce this electricity for AI. So this is a disaster. This literally, if it continues, this will doom the entire world because the United States is the largest producer of greenhouse gas. Getting back to some other aspects, inflation was slightly down in January to an annualized 2.4%, down from 2.6 or 7, whatever it was. Largely because, in one source, the decreases in prices of used cars. Okay. And then in another article
Why did the price of used cars go down?
People were buying used cars rather than new cars because of the tariffs.
Okay, they're buying used cars. Wouldn't that make the price go up?
It did. The price has come down for some reason.
Because probably enough people, everybody who wanted to buy a used car got a used car.
Who knows? And the reason I'm saying who knows is when I looked at the core inflation numbers, the inflation rate was still what it was last month with energy and food taken out. So it remained the same. So here's another one of those circumstances where by different measures people are coming up with slightly different inflation rates. But the difference between 2.4 and 2.7 is hardly game-changing. However, as Donald Trump changed tariffs agreements with several countries, there was one constant. Goods became more expensive for U.S. companies and consumers. His favorite group of people released some research. That would be the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, which has an independent research group. Their analysts and economists found that in 2025, the average tariff rate on imported goods rose to 13%, up from 2.6% at the start of the year. The New York Fed found that 90% of the cost of the increased tariffs that Trump imposed on goods from Mexico, China, Canada, and the European Union was borne by U.S. companies. The U.S. firms and consumers continue to bear the bulk of the economic burden of the high tariffs imposed in 2025. And as tariff rates increased last year, exporting countries did not lower the cost of goods in an attempt to ward off any drop in U.S. demand. So the importers kept their prices the same, passing the cost of the tariffs on to any company importing their goods, which in turn raised the price of those goods from shoppers and made them less available to shoppers. So it's really hard to figure out how these tariffs are doing anything that Trump claimed they would do.
Here's my question. It's speculative. Why do you think the Supreme Court is taking so long to come to a finding about the legality of those tariffs?
I think there are a couple of things. First of all, there's obviously disagreement in the court, and this ruling will have huge implications for all of the powers of Congress that Trump has been exercising. So once they decide that, they're either affirming this, executive presidency as a going concern, and if they go against his use of the tariffs, they will undermine that position, which would be great for democracy. And Trump can find other ways of imposing the tariffs. He's already said that he can work around that with other legislation. That's probably true. But yesterday, the House voted to repeal Trump's tariffs on Canada. It's likely that this will pass the Senate, but it's unlikely Trump would ever sign this piece of legislation. So, too late, they are trying to assert their ability to control tariffs.
It is a prerogative of Congress unless the National Emergency Act is found to be valid in this sense, because that's a predication for it. It's not.
Yeah, there are a couple of predications, different tariffs under different predications. All of them involve the president exercising very unusual powers that are allowed in those emergencies, but do not include taking away the prerogatives of Congress with regard to commerce and the budget.
That's what's raising a question mark in my mind. Obviously, they are in disagreement, or we would have heard something. Obviously, the disagreement is close enough that they can't come to a decision, if you see my point.
Well, I think a strong move by the Senate to pass this legislation will signal to the court that Congress has had enough of Trump setting tariffs. And if they decide he can't do it and kick out his tariffs, then he would have to go back to Congress to do it. So in some sense, how the Supreme Court rules is going to determine whether Trump goes on or whether the power to set tariffs is returned to Congress, and then he will have to go back to Congress to ask for these tariffs.
And if Congress comes under the control of the Democrats, they can reassert their right to set tariffs in the same way they're trying to do it now. Just say, well, we're rescinding them.
Yeah.
So it's a very tricky question. In other words, as you say, if the Supreme Court takes enough time, their judgment may be irrelevant.
Well, of course, they do that frequently. If they can get a question resolved without them having to make a decision, that is considered a good outcome, yeah.
If Congress acts in a way that...
But in order to act directly at this time, in other words, they could vote to impose a tariff on Canada or take away one, but Trump has to sign it.
Well, now, let's not get too skeptical about signing it, because he did sign the law that required the release of the Epstein files.
But he already knew that the legislation was veto-proof by the vote.
Oh, I keep forgetting that little... Well, I don't forget it. I mean, I'm glad you reminded me of it.
Right. So he's got... If now Republicans voted with the Democrats in order to pass this piece of legislation in the House over the objections of Mike Johnson, but I don't think they have a veto-proof majority in either house to vote on this bill.
Okay. All right. I just thought I'd bring that up. And now let's turn to something that is culturally interesting and otherwise irrelevant. What did you think of the halftime show for the Super Bowl?
I thought it was very entertaining. I thought it was inspiring in that it celebrated the music and culture and dance of all of the Americas, which he mentioned alphabetically at the end, and included all of the North American, all of Central America, and all of South America as his definition of America. There were other musicians brought in to perform.
Yes.
Green Day and Lady Gaga, who performed in English. Obviously, the music was in Spanish, but, I listened to a lot of tango. I liked the samba, and yes, it was different, and I enjoyed the difference. And I thought the building that amazing set on the football field was hysterical with little bodegos, and I thought it was very entertaining, despite the fact that the music was not as accessible to me as it ordinarily would be. But, I can't understand a thing U2 says either. I can't understand Dr. Dre and his classic Chronic album. I mean, a lot of this is because my ear isn't attuned to it, and sometimes I don't speak the language, and that's okay with me.
Yeah, I didn't care about any of those arguments. I thought, where is America? He wants to sing in Spanish, he should sing in Spanish. That's right. What he does. I thought the set was great. But what I thought was, first of all, very few people commented on this really interesting integration between what the people in the stadium could see on the Jumbotron and what we could see on our television screens as virtual.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would step from that frame, from the Jumbotron, into this material reality of the set. And that was done several times. And I thought, wow, that is really, there's something very clever about that and very interesting.
There's a lot of that going on at live concerts now, where you see the person on the Jumbotron doing something not related to getting ready to do it, and then they suddenly appear coming out of the screen, and you're in the live act.
I think it's a very interesting thing to do on a football field.
Yeah, I thought it was cool.
And I had less problems because I, of course, didn't watch the game.
Neither did I.
Who cares? So I watched it on the replay on YouTube. Okay. And YouTube gave us the Spanish subtitles.
Oh.
Well, I could follow along. First of all, no pop music, no pop lyrics are complicated in any language. They're, it's a lot of repetition. It's a limited set of, it's not that complicated. So, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the joyful sense of it. I enjoyed we used to be colonials, making your sugar, and now look at us. I enjoyed all of that. But it was so disconnected. It would move quickly from one scenario to another. All of a sudden, there's people getting married in the middle of this, and I thought, well, I'm sure they're very nice. Who's the little boy that he just gave his award to? I mean, things were just moving at a fast pace.
Here's an interesting thing that came out afterwards. They needed to hire extras for this, and so they gave out tickets, and the people who showed up were that couple that was going to get married, and the woman being very conspicuously with child, and they brought their minister. They actually did get married there.
I know they did.
And I thought how interesting and inclusive in a weird way.
Well, that's what I thought too. And then, okay, so he gives them the ring, and then a few minutes, hours later, they're getting married, and there's cake, and then he's on top of a telephone pole.
Yeah, that was kind of odd.
It was disintegrated.
Okay.
And then two other things.
Okay, then I have the kicker.
All right, I'll give you the kicker, but I have two other things. One is, I do not like young girls twerking in my face. I just don't care for it.
Yeah.
There's nothing elegant about twerking to begin with. And in my face, I don't need it. All right, I've got granddaughters who twerk, but I don't go to nightclubs with them. You know what I'm saying? Second of all, ever since Michael Jackson grabbed his crotch, singers seem to feel like they should grab their crotch. And you know what I think? I think if you have to go pee, you should do it before the halftime.
Yeah, they're too young for that. You know, I'm the one who's interrupting the podcast every 15 minutes. Okay, you want to hear the kicker?
Yeah.
There were screenshots from Mar-a-Lago showing the Big Bunny halftime show at their Super Bowl party.
Oh, really?
Really?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's precious.
They didn't watch the other piece of poo over there,
No, they didn't watch the other one.
the white redneck show?
And the notion that, you know, the MAGA followers can't go 15 minutes without hearing country music says terrible things. I could have gone 15 years without seeing that.
Well, real country music, I think, is a contribution to American culture, but that had nothing to do with what they were doing.
No, not at all. And that was, you know, the interesting thing is that Kid Rock, when he wrote these songs and performed them in his heyday, it was ironic. Now it's serious,
Yes.
and that's scary, you know.
That's what I think, too. And I think he's past his prime, but he's also grown into the grotesque ideology that he professes.
Yeah, it's sad.
Yeah, it is not sad. It's just sickening. I have to disagree with you.
Okay.
Okay, so we handled that cultural moment very well, I think. I followed the Spanish of Bad Bunny. And then there was another performer I've never heard of before because I don't follow that music, who was singing in Spanish a solo. Pure Castilian Spanish. It was beautiful. And you could see it in the subtitles. You could see how the Spanish changed from what I guess is Puerto Rican to this classical Spanish. And frankly, I think it would be wonderful if Americans could get that, could be attuned to it.
Could notice that there are different dialects of Spanish being spoken all up and down
Yeah.
this continent.
Yeah, and I liked it. I liked it at the end when he listed all the countries and they came out with their flags. I thought, well, there's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong with it?
Seems kind of patriotic.
It's just a halftime show.
Yeah, that's the other thing. This is not important, though it was the second most watched Super Bowl halftime show in history.
Ah, that's what I like, too.
Yeah. So people tuned in,
Yeah.
you know. And, of course, it was not even an interesting game. It was a blowout, which
Yes.
Super Bowls frequently are.
Well, right, and I don't care to watch commercials.
Yeah.
And I'm not interested in football, but I did watch this, and I have to say, Trump and his MAGA supporters boosted the viewership.
I'm sure they did.
And so I say, well, do some more of that.
Yeah. Do you remember back in your media and society days when one of the big conversations in media was they would re-show all the commercials during the Super Bowl halftime?
Yes.
And assess their impact, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening, and keep the comments coming in. We really do appreciate it. And we'll see you next week. They're about to turn out the lights here in the library because why? It's Friday at a liberal arts college, so who needs to be here?
Apparently, it turns out, I talked to the librarian today, that was a decision by Buildings and Grounds.
Buildings and Grounds?
Yeah, he doesn't even know how to turn on the lights in his office. So I told him I'd get a floor lamp.
Well, I was going to bring candles.
Let's not do that. It's a building full of books, okay?
Okay, we'll see you next week.
See you, everyone. Thanks for
Bye-bye.
listening.